Good evening. This is quite extraordinary. I am Ed Hirschfield, the president of Temple Israel, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all here to this, as I said, incredible and very exciting event. I'd like to call on Rabbi Ron Fish, our senior rabbi, to say a few words.
Truly, very few words. It is a pleasure to see so many people here together. This is sort of backwards. We don't usually start with Kiddush and then continue with the program, but it's a nice format. Maybe we should think about that. What do you think? That gets applause. It is a pleasure to welcome all of our distinguished guests and all of the community here today to learn about a community that perhaps is not uppermost in the minds of most American Jews as a Jewish community, but one which we are privileged to have representatives in our own midst who are representatives of that community. The experience of the Irish Jewish community is one of note for the Jewish people of the state of Israel, Jews all over the world, and in many ways we are all here to learn from the success of that community in having laid down a marker for the Jewish future. I think one thing in particular we perhaps need to work for together is to learn how the Irish community has been a force for peace, and we can pray for peace for us, for Israel, for the whole world, which is a combination of courage in the face of terror, and also the knowledge that we are all one community made up of brothers and sisters across religious lines and national lines, joined together in our hopes for a world that is healed. So I again want to welcome all of you with gratitude that you're joining us today, and I'm going to give it back to our president, Ed Hirschfield.
Thank you, Rabbi. I have three very quick tasks to perform, and then I'll turn it over to David Briscoe. First, I'd like to welcome some of the distinguished guests that are here this evening. State Senator Jim Timolty and three state representatives, Lou Kafka, Claire Cronin, and Walter Timothy. Thank you very, very much for taking time away from your schedules and joining us this evening. The other two things I need to do are first, to give you an outline of the program this evening. We're honored to have several other distinguished guests who will be addressing you briefly, and David Briscoe will tell you a little bit more about them. Following that, there'll be an introduction to the movie. We'll then enjoy this remarkable film, which the director, Valerie Lapin, who's with us this evening, took on and produced. Valerie's here also with her husband, Mike Hanley, and they traveled all the way from San Francisco. And as a bonus, got to see Valerie's mother, Ruth, who's with us this evening, and some other members of Valerie's family, her nephews, who are here too. So thank you very, very much, Valerie and Michael, especially for coming such a great distance. So after the movie, Valerie will have a question and answer session. And following the Q&A session, she'll also be available if any of you would like to come up, those of you who don't want to rush out and see who's winning Best Actor or Best Actress, you'll be able to ask Valerie some additional questions. The last thing, and then I'll get off the stage and turn it over to David, is I want to thank several people in addition to Valerie who have made this evening possible. First, the members of our Adult and Family Education Committee, chaired by David Getz, Janet Aronson, Stephanie Gam, Steve Steinberg, Stacy Chorney, Elliot Feldman, Chuck Levine, Aaron Fischel, Art Newman, and Temple Vice President Beth Lapin, all of whom really worked very, very hard to make this happen. Also to Ron Zick and Larry Sandberg for handling technology. Hopefully we won't need them after I'm done. David Beckman for some equipment assistance, and our Executive Director Benjamin Marin, and Marla Foreman and the rest of the office staff for all their administrative support. But most importantly, a huge thank you to the entire Briscoe family, David, Carol, Adam, and Leah, and especially who were really for everything that they did in the course of this evening. David conceived of this event. He's toiled tirelessly to make it a reality. I know it's been a labor of love for David, and now I'd like to turn the rest of the program over to David Briscoe.
Thank you very much, Ed. And I'd also like to express my appreciation to the Adult and Family Education Committee and especially to Michael Getz for organizing this event. And I'd like to also thank the Irish Cultural Centre and Yehudi Yaakov, Consul General of Israel, for co-sponsoring this program. Of course, Valerie for traveling from San Francisco. That made it happen. My family and I are extraordinarily proud of the huge interest in the Irish Jewish community and the roles they've played in both Irish society, in the fight for Irish freedom, as revolutionaries, and in the establishment of the State of Israel. And we thank everybody for coming here to this program and in honor of my father who passed away last September. I'd especially like to thank Fionnuala Quinlan, the Irish Consul General, for her support, as well as Yehuda Yaakov, and the Irish Cultural Centre, famous Seamus as we call him, Seamus Mulligan, and the Era Society, Charitable Irish, Irish-American Partnership, as well as membership, members of leadership of Jewish organizations, specifically the AJC and World Boston. My brother Daniel and I grew up in Dublin in a house that was just alive with Irish politics. There was an intense sense of pride in the concept of public service, and it was always evident to any visitor and in any discussion that happened in the house. My uncle, Ben Briscoe, was a member of the Irish Parliament for as long as I can remember, and it was not uncommon for us to go to Dáil Éireann, that's the House of Parliament there, and just meet politicians and state representatives. This was sort of a normal course of events. And we understood that life and that work very intensely. My father, Joseph, was known to everybody as Uncle Joe. He devoted a significant amount of his time to local community, specifically Irish community, but also very much the Jewish community, and he was a great supporter of many national agendas. And he was very much a supporter of Ireland in terms of its role within Europe. He was well known to Irish political life, and he wore his army uniform proudly at formal events. He was a member of the Irish Army Reserves for nearly 50 years. His father, my grandfather, Robert Briscoe, is well known to many of you here, and he's well known to a lot in the Irish-American and Jewish-American communities. My brother and I understood the enormous contributions he had made to Irish politics as a member of Parliament. These were mainly through stories, but we could get a sense and we could feel his intense devotion to Ireland as an Irishman and as a revolutionary in the Civil War. We were also very aware of how he always had to balance this loyalty for Ireland as he evolved as a leader in Europe and in the US in promoting his Jewish identity, and especially his intense support for Jabotinsky and the New Zionist movement. He spent a lot of time with Jabotinsky in terms of his quest to, and success in getting Jews out of Holocaust Europe into Palestine. And Kevin McCarthy, who's an Irish historian, wrote a book, and I met him for the first time approximately a month ago, around about the time that he published this book. And Ron has a slide of the book that we can show here. So this book was launched in January of this year, and it tells a story based on recently uncovered archives about this history and about my grandfather in terms of what he did for Ireland and also with the New Zionist movement. And much of the history was unknown to us, and when I say us, I mean our family. Prior to Kevin's research, he's not a member of our family, he's actually from Cork, as Fionnuala is. And our extended family and ourselves are just somewhat in awe of many of the trials and tribulations that were uncovered as a result of his research. And in an email, Kevin had written to me that my father was a great support to him and helped him access material, and he specifically said that my father was resolute in ensuring that this study was based on documents and facts, not just stories. So what I would say that in this centennial year, in the anniversary of the 1916 Rising, which was the beginning of the Irish Civil War, our shared experiences should hopefully initiate a dialogue among the Irish, the Jewish, and the Israeli leaders, specifically in no better place than here in Boston. And I'd like to sort of highlight that there are many historical common bonds, and I hope that you learn a lot about them in the course of this movie, Shalom Ireland. So with that said, I think I'll step down for a little bit. I'd like to introduce some of our distinguished guests. Specifically, I'd like to first of all ask Fionnuala Quinlan to say a few words. And Fionnuala is recently, I should say recently, it's been nearly 3-4 months now anyway. She's sort of a visitor to Boston still, and really happy you joined us here tonight, Fionnuala. Thanks for taking time.
Briscoe goes to. It's wonderful to see such a large gathering here today, and I think it's just a fantastic tribute to David and David's family. And I know I'm very, very proud to be here this evening and to take part in it. And it's a wonderful tribute to your dad, Joseph. It's so lovely to hear a little bit about him this evening. So I'd like to thank you, David, for your very interesting remarks. As you can all see, David has a very fascinating family history, and I know I'm very much looking forward to reading Kevin McCarthy's book. So the Briscoes played a really very important role in Ireland for many years. Robert, of course, in the War of Independence, and as a TD or a Member of Parliament for almost 40 years. And David's uncle Ben as a TD for a further 37 years. But I would have been most familiar with him, I think, as a very extremely popular Lord Mayor of Dublin. That's what resonates in my mind when I hear Ben Briscoe. But there are many other links between Ireland and Israel that I'd like to touch on briefly this evening. So as well as claiming the Briscoes, we're also very proud of our connection to the Herzog family in Ireland. Yitzhak, as many of you know, was Chief Rabbi of Ireland, and his son Haim was born in Belfast and then migrated to Israel in the 30s, where he went on to become president. And I believe his son Yitzhak today continues the very good political family tradition. There are also many cultural links that join our two nations. Our own embassy, the Irish Embassy in Tel Aviv, promotes Irish cultural visits to Israel, and we've also helped support Irish cultural studies programs in Israeli universities. And as you mentioned, David, in the 1990s, I believe it was Rabbi Fish actually mentioned in the 1990s, the blossoming Middle East process actually, as well as the South African process, did a lot to encourage new movement and fresh thinking in the Irish peace process. And now we are trying to return the favour by hosting groups from Israel and Palestine who can come to Northern Ireland, take a little bit of time out from the difficulties back home and meet with participants in the Irish peace process and take from them the lessons that are most useful for the peace process in the Middle East. So, and I'm happy to say already this year, even though we're only into February, we've had 2 groups, so that's a good start to 2016. And my department, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, will visit Israel later this year to look for new partners so that we can step up this very important engagement. One of our government's priorities, and it's particularly important I think in this centenary year, has been the development of our links with the diaspora, our own diaspora, and that's for our benefit and for the diaspora's benefit. And of course, Israel, as we all know, is a world leader in this. It sets the gold standard for diaspora engagement. So I know our government is very grateful for the generosity that Israel has shown in sharing lessons with us and helping us to develop our own thinking and policies on that. And one other very significant connection between our two countries, of course, is the fact that for many years now, Ireland has deployed a very significant part of our very small armed forces in peacekeeping missions around Israel's borders, and we've been strongly committed to do what we can to help maintain stability on borders with Lebanon and Syria. And the final link I'd like to mention tonight, and I think it's particularly pertinent this year, is that there was a forest named after our president, Eamon de Valera, in Galilee, and apparently that was dedicated to him in the mid-1960s as a symbol of the deep friendship between Ireland and Israel that I know we're all continuing to honour here this evening. So speaking of Eamon de Valera brings me on to one other topic that I'd like to touch on very briefly this evening, which is the centenary of the Irish Rising. So this year marks 100 years since the Rising took place, and that was a seminal event in Irish history which set us on our path to independence. So in Ireland it's going to be marked in a major way, in state ceremonials, in art programmes, in schools, by the Defence Forces, in many, many ways. But given I've mentioned our diaspora, of course, is a huge part of the Irish story, the 1916 Rising is also going to be commemorated around the globe. But I think nowhere more so than here in the United States, given the specific particular resonance it has for the United States. 5 of the 7 signatories to our Proclamation of Independence, which was read on the steps of the General Post Office on O'Connell Street on the 24th of April on a Monday. 5 of the 7 signatories to that were actually spent significant amounts of time in the States before the Rising. 2 of them were citizens of the United States, and also the United States is the only country outside of Ireland that's actually mentioned in our proclamation. So, you know, there are so many connections because the influence of the United States was very strong. So it's going to be marked in a major way also across the United States, in far too many ways to mention, but I would just like to invite everybody here to join us on this very important journey that we're taking this year when we look forward look back, I should say, first and foremost at the 100 years that have passed and about our own journey to nationhood, and then set our compass to chart our journey for the next 100 years. So it's going to be a very interesting year, and I hope that many of you will be able to join us in some of the events that we're organising here in Boston, but also around the United States. And thanks again to David and the Briscoe family for hosting this lovely event this evening.
Thank you, Fanua. I just want to mention that in this book, I've been trying to read this book, it mentioned that my grandfather was he was exiled he was imprisoned and actually was sent away to New York, so he was with the revolutionaries in New York at the time of the Rising. And he wrote a letter that Kevin is in the book. He says, on hearing of the executions, Briscoe confessed to feeling his heart was torn from his body. However, they all also realized instantly that it was the worst mistake England at that time could ever make because it aroused a firestorm of resentment in Irishmen throughout the world. So yeah, it's quite amazing, the whole story, and look forward to some of the celebrations. I'd next like to introduce Yehudi Yaakov, who is the Consul General to Israel here in Boston.
Thank you very much. Good evening. David, I'm with you. You want to use Boston to strengthen Irish-Israeli relations? I think together with the Irish Consul General, who I've been the pleasure to actually speak with on a number of occasions in the last couple of weeks, I think we're up to the task. So how do I come to the Irish issue? Many of you know that I wasn't raised in Ireland. I don't know anything about the history of Ireland, really. But I understand that there are many Irish in the audience today, so I have this overwhelming sense that I need to at least do one confession. So here's my one confession, and if the mood overtakes me, I'll make another one. My first girlfriend was Irish. It's true. Now, we were only 5 years old, and it was a little peck behind the bushes, but she was my girlfriend. I think her name was Janet. Another confession. Many of you know I was born and raised in New York, right? Boston Red Sox fan, right? Everyone knows that. Okay. We're beyond that already. I'm in my third year here. But I did cut class almost every year to go to the St. Patrick's Day Parade in New York. So I do have credentials in this issue. Irish Consul General, honored by your presence, elected officials, David Briscoe, who's been an untiring ally and confidant in discussing ways how Boston can be just much more relevant to this end. And we've talked about many things. First of all, we're here to, of course it's not about me, it's about the history and the foundations and the infrastructure that some mention has been made, reference has been made already. The importance of learning about our shared history. Now, many of us being Jews, we know we often study history so that mistakes aren't made again. But history is also to accentuate bonds that perhaps were stronger in the past and then can be renewed and rejuvenated and to be carried on, and perhaps we are, that's the relevancy maybe to me of this evening. It's moving into the next phase of Israel-Irish relations by recalling an illustrious shared history, which I'm very eager to become enlightened about even more this evening. As the Consul General already mentioned, no family better symbolizes this shared history than the Herzogs. Of course, there have been others. But if we fast forward to now, I think I feel that we need to look more to ties that are really sustaining Israel's relationship with the modern world, and that is the area of business, entrepreneurship, and innovation. I won't throw all the figures out, but David claims that there are hundreds of Israeli families of entrepreneurs. This is correct, right? You said hundreds. You said hundreds. So this is my source. Currently in Ireland, involved in business ventures, and it doesn't really matter what the number is. There's an ongoing number of Israeli companies setting up shop in Ireland and vice versa. We know that. This is something that is developing. We have seen recently young Irish entrepreneurs enthusiastically expressing an interest in further welding the relationship with their Israeli counterparts. I believe that, and I've said this to the powers that be, that the establishment only a couple of weeks ago of Mass Challenge Israel in Jerusalem, which is not an Israeli organization, that is going to bring entrepreneurs and potential entrepreneurs from all over the world. I'm hoping that we will also see Irish entrepreneurs at Mass Challenge Israel in Jerusalem. I think that would be a great target goal to focus on, and I'm hopeful that it will happen. The Weizmann Institute of Science and Trinity College Dublin have joined forces to combat inflammatory diseases and cancer. We know that there's an increasing number of Irish students, particularly in business administration and innovation, who are taking more and more interest in Israel. And I think that we're looking now, with the new generation on both sides, looking to something which will flourish sooner rather than later into a very, very robust partnership. At the end of the day, it's about partnerships. It's not about me making money off of you and you making money off of me. It's about partnering. It's about bringing to the world, banging our heads together, bringing to the world a better idea, a better solution to a challenge than we had previously. And I strongly believe, having grown up with the Irish, another confession, I played baseball for a Catholic church. I think that we're approaching the horizon of something really, really exciting. So hopefully I can infect you with that excitement and encourage those who might have the opportunity to contribute to it, to contribute it. And if not, you're left with the only option. Go to Israel and have a good Irish beer at Molly's Bloom pub in Tel Aviv. Thank you.
So by the way, I grew up with the owner of Molly's Bloom's pub. His name is Robert Briscoe. I'll get you a free pint there. I think we were going to try and Skype in my brother from Tel Aviv, but I think Ron has a video to show us.
My name is Dr. Briscoe. I'm David's brother, and I'd like to thank all the distinguished sponsors and guests who've come here to make this evening happen in memory of our late dear father, Joe Briscoe. There's nothing that would have pleased Dad more than to see the Irish and Israeli consuls sitting here together and making this evening happen in such a special way. The roots of the birth of the Irish Republic and the State of Israel are very much intertwined, and I, as the Israeli branch of a very deep-rooted Irish family, know this and understand this very, very well. I think that Shalom Ireland will show this to a certain extent, and I would just add that I've just seen the plaque that has been put on the first Cromwell tank that was owned by the Israeli army. It was actually stolen from the British army by an Irish soldier in the British army. His name was Nick Flanagan, and he operated the tank for the Israelis during the War of Independence. So it was another Irishman who contributed to the birth of the State of Israel. So I do hope that this evening brings to a lot of cooperation and goodwill between both countries, and look forward to more occasions of this type. I know that Dad would be over the moon, and I really think there's nothing that could be better in his honor. So I thank you all very much for coming, and I wish you all very, very well. Good night.
Next we have Seamus Mulligan, who's the president of the Irish Cultural Centre, and would like to say a few words.
Well, thanks very much for inviting us, and thanks very much for allowing us to participate in this evening. I am absolutely blown away. This thing was just a little germ in your mind not so very long ago, and I think that this is a great tribute to you and also to the devotion of both countries to each other. So thank you very much for participating or allowing us to participate in it. Well, at first glance, the Irish and the Jewish people seem radically different. But scratch the surface and they began to look very much like twins that were separated at birth. The stories of these two wandering tribes share many extraordinary parallels. These two ancient peoples were destined to wander the world as outsiders, knowing suspicion and derision wherever they went. Throughout it all, both maintained tight and close bonds with their own kin, even in the farthest corners of the earth. Both have homelands that are small, sacred, and contested, and very ancient. Ireland and Israel both boast monuments far older than the pyramids in Egypt. Some even dare to speculate that the Irish may very well be connected to one of the lost tribes of Israel, or at least Leon Uris in his book Trinity. Certainly stone burial chambers called dolmens are found in both Ireland and Israel, and these date to about 4000 before Christ. Yet, any such mysterious common origins are now lost in time. And then we have, in more recent years, and in more recent centuries, the Irish and the Jews have inordinately swollen the ranks of genius. A disproportionate number of Nobel laureates have Jewish or Irish origins. Both peoples also suffered death and cruelty at the hands of the oppressors. While many now live in small, beautiful, and intense homelands of Ireland and Israel, the greater portion of both tribes remain scattered to the four corners of the earth. The Irish diaspora at 90 million right now, and the Jewish diaspora at 25 million. Both tribes most particularly found a home in the United States. And from humble beginnings in America, these two ethnic groups rose to prominence by the middle of the 20th century. By the time of President John F. Kennedy's election in 1960, Irish and Jewish Americans were the two wealthiest and most successful ethnic groups in the United States. And when these two peoples melted together in the great melting pot of America, their collaboration in some part of most extraordinary human achievements of all time, the space race, the moon landings, and the defeat of communism and Nazism. Didn't type a page. And this latter enterprise is attested to in cold white marble at the American Cemetery in Normandy, where many Irish Americans and Jewish Americans lie side by side. In 432, St. Patrick brought the Christian teachings and the ancient Jewish law to Ireland. Embedded intrinsically within the Christianity is the Jewish law, the sacred Ten Commandments, and the knowledge of one God, which both peoples hold in common to this day. We remember, too, that Jesus himself was a Jew. In Ireland, it was stored and nurtured through the Dark Ages. And from Ireland, wandering monks then brought these teachings to Scotland, Scandinavia, and continental Europe. And from there, Christianity in its core of Jewish law eventually traveled onward to America, Africa, and Asia. And in the span of human history, Israel and Ireland both played pivotal roles in disseminating to the world the moral teachings of ancient Israel. Israel declared independence on the 20th of April, 1948. Ireland, already partly independent, became a republic on the 18th of April, 1949. And sadly, both nations have known much discord and violence since that time. Yet amid the rights and the wrongs and the complexities, there is hope. As the Irish and the Israelis now hope to build a lasting place in their own homelands, it is heartening to note that in the tapestry of human life, we all share far more similarities than differences. And thank you for having us.
Thanks so much, James. So now you know why I'm a great fan of the Irish Cultural Centre in Canton. So if anybody wants to join the Irish Cultural Centre from here, you can contact Seamus or myself. I'd next like to ask Joe Leary of the Irish-American Partnership to say a few words. Joe.
I haven't really prepared anything, so I'm devastated by your remarks, Seamus. Put me to shame. I'm honored to be here. The reason I'm here is that I formed a friendship with Ben Briscoe, Robert Briscoe's son. Ben was mayor of Dublin and a member of the Irish Parliament, as we've heard. He was a bit of a devil, I must tell you. And there's a picture of him and Ray Flynn in my office, opening our office back in 1989 when he came here. And he's a robust fellow, and he said, now tomorrow we're marching in the St. Patrick's Day Parade. And I hadn't frankly seen it before. He said, you're coming with me. So there I was with Ray Flynn and Ben Briscoe marching down Washington Street in South Washington. And he came to us the next day and he opened our office. Ben and I have had a friendship for quite a long time. He was an expert at asking for grants from our charity. And Mary McAleer is here, and she can testify that we gave $5,000 on at least one occasion to what I think was the Jewish Home for the Aged in Dublin. That was back a number of years ago. I saw the film that you're about to see, and it's absolutely extraordinary. And I don't think it mentions that there was a second Jewish mayor in Dublin, and not in Dublin, in Cork, a fellow by the name of Goldberg, was elected in 1977. So the ties between the countries are not just based on the Briscoe family, although everybody is very proud of that. I'm happy to be here and happy to celebrate my friendship with Ben and the Briscoe family. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. And without further ado, we have Valerie Lapin introduce the movie Shalom Ireland. Valerie, thank you so much for
Hello, everyone. This is terrific. I'm so impressed now that I can look at you all, see how many people are here. It's really a tribute to the Briscoe family, and I think the affection and respect that we all have for them. So it's really nice to see this tremendous turnout, and I want to thank Temple Israel for bringing this wonderful event together, and the Irish Center, and thank you both, the Consul Generals. I appreciate you being here and honored with your presence. I am planning to go to Ireland in a few weeks, and so I appreciate your remarks to witness the events of the centenary for 1916 Rising. And Consul General, I have a confession to make to you myself. My first husband is Irish, and he's sitting there behind you. That's Michael. You'll hear more about him because he's in large part responsible for the making of this film. I also want to thank the Briscoe family for pulling this together, David and Carol and Adam and Leah. On a personal note, this film would never have been possible without the Briscoe family. The first person that I called when I thought about making this film was Joe. And he and Ben opened doors for me. They were tremendous support. It wouldn't have been possible without their participation. And through the course of making the film and beyond, they became good friends, and especially Joe really became like family. So it's very heartening to me to see our friendship continue in the next generation. And so when David called me up and asked me if I would come for this event, I didn't hesitate. I had to be here because I wanted to pay tribute and honor a person who had a lot of influence on my life. So can I just ask, for a show of hands here, how many Irish are in the house? Wow. And how many Irish Jews? Wow, that's great too. And any Jews in the house? And also, can I ask, how many people knew Joe? Yeah. So all of you will understand when I say that Joe was a tremendous personality. He was a warm person, a welcoming person. I think that the Briscoe family stands as a model for all of us about civic participation and honoring our community. As any of you know, who knew Joe, he had a tremendous, he was a patriot. He was an Irish patriot. He was very proud of that. He was also incredibly proud of his Irish-Jewish heritage and of being Jewish. And I think that he himself was somewhat awed by his family history and realized that it was unique and remarkable, and served somewhat as an ambassador for the community. And if any of you ever came in contact with him and showed any interest, he would just, if you wanted to listen to his stories, he would take you in. And he was just such a wonderful spirit and ambassador for all of us. And it was infectious. You couldn't help but share his enthusiasm when you saw his love for his country and his religion. So without further ado, let's just watch this, and I'll tell you more about why I made the film after you have a chance to see it. I think it'll provide some context. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, we're going to cut to a trailer, so a few-minute trailer. That's the beginning of the film, and then the rest of you can see this. So thank you all for being here.
My father used to say that Jews had the facility of picking up the best qualities of the wider community in which they lived. For instance, the German Jews were inclined to be a bit arrogant. The British Jews were inclined to be a bit pompous. The American Jews were inclined to be a bit boastful. And he said the Irish Jews were the friendliest Jews in the world. They also, unfortunately, drank more than any other Jews.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to our Irish Jewish Museum. We give you Céad Míle Fáilte, if you know what that means, 100,000 welcomes in Irish. And in Hebrew, it's Shalom. I'm sure it's going to be of interest to you. If you'd like to look around, I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have regarding the community. You may notice we have an old-fashioned moil knife, if you know what that means. A circumcision knife. That was used, we'll say, about 100 years ago to circumcise a little boy, a Jewish boy, 8 days after he was born.
Right, okay. But that knife has only been used once?
Oh no, it would be sharpened. But it's a different method at the moment. You may notice the table there, which symbolizes a Friday night table celebrated by most Orthodox Jewish households. The lady of the house, the wife, usually says a blessing over the candlesticks.
Do you find that those customs are still very much held to?
Of course they are.
The question, what I mean, is that obviously there's a lot of lapsed Jews.
A Jew can never lapse. A Jew is a Jew, no matter whatever he lapses. Right. We have a phrase in Hebrew which says, Chaverim kol Yisrael. That's Hebrew, which says, no matter where you are, a Jew is a brother to another Jew. And that's been literally the way of the Jewish people over the centuries.
Ireland's Jewish population has always been small, but the Jews of Ireland have played a remarkable yet little known role in the history of the country.
That was incredible. I'd like to call up Valerie and David. We'll have about a 15-minute or so question and answer period. And ask you the question that you sort of hinted at before. What led you to make this film? And tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how this came to be.
First, I'd like to introduce several very special guests who are here with me this evening. My mother, Ruth, is right in front of me in the second row. And next to her is my nephew, Andrew, and my other nephew, Josh, and my husband, Michael Danley. So the question is, why did I make this film? I grew up in Los Angeles and raised in a Jewish family, and I really didn't know a whole lot about my heritage, my background. We knew that my great-grandparents came from somewhere in Russia, and that was about it. When I met Michael, I was really impressed with his strong sense of pride in his Irish-American culture, and that was really kind of infectious, and I grew to love the Irish people and culture and became very interested in the history and kind of felt like I adopted that culture. And in the early 90s, we went over to Ireland. It was my first trip, and Michael actually found that there, in a guidebook, that there was the Irish Jewish Museum, and the two of us were kind of amused by it. We were curious. We didn't know that there were any Jews in Ireland, so we rang them up, and they're only open a few hours a week, so I had to make sure that we went over there at the right time. And they said, come on over, we'll be waiting for you. And we got there, we drove up, and there were these two women waiting for us outside, ready to take us on a tour. And I took a look at them, and they looked just like my Jewish grandmothers. And I remember them walking down the street in Fairfax. Fairfax is just the main corridor of one of the predominantly Jewish communities in Los Angeles. And the way they dressed, their mannerisms were very similar. But when they started to speak, they had these beautiful Irish accents, and so it was kind of a double take. It was kind of surreal, because then they also started to lace their language with Yiddish. So I didn't know where I was. So they took us on a tour at the museum, and I became really fascinated, especially with the story of Robert Briscoe. I was just kind of blown away with the role he played in history. And a few months after that trip, after we returned home, my father called me up one day and he said, you know, we have a genealogist in the family, and she's found these documents that indicate that your great-grandparents were married in Waterford, Ireland. And my father was kind of doubtful. He didn't really believe it at first. So I wrote to the curator of the Irish Jewish Museum, and one morning I got a telephone call from Joe Morrison, the one with the eyebrows, right? And he said, you know, the curator, I'm a volunteer docent at the museum. The museum's all run by volunteers. And the curator gave me your letter because my mother was a Lapin, which is my name. And she, you know, as Joe said in the film, he grew up in Limerick, but he had an uncle who lived in Limerick in Waterford, about 20 years after the time that my great-grandparents were married there. So we could never figure out the direct connection, but we figured first of all, how many Jews are there in Ireland, right? And how many Jews would there be with the same name? So we decided that we were cousins. And so when I decided to make the film, you know, the more and more I found out about the history and my own personal connection, I just decided I had to make this film. And so Joe Briscoe was actually the first person I called when I was thinking of making the film, and he was just so warm and welcoming. And when I set out to, and I met Joe, both Joes, and I knew between the two of them they'd be fantastic interviews. Cleo ended up being a pleasant surprise. I wasn't really expecting that she would be such a great interview. So when I set out to make the film, I really felt like I wanted to make something that was a celebration of my own culture, the culture that I felt like I had adopted when I married into Michael's family, and then later found out is actually part of my own history too. So I had envisioned and hoped that the film would create events like this, these cross-cultural events where people could really come together, learn about each other's cultures and backgrounds, and create a better understanding between the two cultures and build bridges. So I think you're all evidence of that it worked in some way, so thank you. Oh, is it possessed now?
Yeah, I think everybody wants to head off to watch the Oscars at some point, but we're all going to stick around. So what I think we'll do is we'll end the program, and if anybody wants to speak with Valerie or anybody else here, we'll stick around for another half hour or so. Thank you very much.